We're going to talk about this examples from Elah. And I'm going to start with a this is actually from a guy, the quote is from a guy named Jim Wendler. Now, if you look up quotes by Jim Wendler, you may find that mine has been censored a little bit, fair warning. But Jim Wendler is a guy who, he's actually he's a power lifter, he's an author. Brian Chanel, who most of you know, kind of got me interested in him and reading some of his exercise and athletic books and things. But as you can imagine, a guy his size, he's a great big old huge guy, he says, he always gets commentary all the time about his size and his success. And he has this quote, and it says, "One of my favorite excuses from the mediocre army," he doesn't mince a lot of words, "when defending their numbers when compared to strong lifters is this: if I didn't have a job and lifting was my job, I'd be that strong too." And his response is, no, you wouldn't. You'd be playing Xbox all day, engrossed in reality TV, and sleeping until noon. You're weak because you're weak. Now, if we take a very blunt, harsh, in-your-face modification that we will then soften and change, one of my favorite excuses from the mediocre army when defending their numbers when compared to others is, if I didn't have a job and being a Christian was my job. See, all of us can fall into this place, this position, all of us, where it becomes easy to look at what anyone else is involved in, how much they are involved, how much they're doing, how close their relationship is, how deep their quiet time is, how many people they're loving, how they're loving other people, and we start to look at things like this. Well, they have more time. They don't have kids. They do have kids. They went to seminary. Their kids are young. Their kids have moved out. They live closer to the church building. I have actually heard that one. They get paid to be a Christian. Their parent was a preacher, elder, missionary. Okay. They're retired. They're young. They're old. They went to a Christian school. They have money. They're not me. Now, this would set itself up really well, right, to be this David and Goliath sermon, because you've got David, the overlooked one, the young one, the small one, the shepherd, and he fights Goliath and all this. But we're going to kind of look at this from a different angle. We're going to give some backstory a little bit, but we are going to look at that valley and look at the story of David and Goliath, but we're kind of without the part about David, if we can find a story there. But to give a little bit of back story first on what we're looking at today, we're going to do a couple verses in James, and we're going to look at a couple verses in John. So we'll have James 1, we'll have James 4, and then we'll have a couple in John. Here's the first one. James 1, 19 through 22 is how we'll start this. It says, "Know this, my beloved brothers," this coming from Jesus' brother, "let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God." Now, let me stop right there. Because once you are a Christian, then that becomes really easy, right? Like, for instance, this week, 2 days ago, we were out shopping. Aaron was driving. I was in the passenger seat. We had Paisley in the back seat. And we started to pull into this parking spot, right? Aaron was driving. She started to pull in. And another lady, kind of pulled up real quick as Aaron went in. Now, the front spot was open too. So Aaron pulled through to the front spot, which was a little tighter, so that, this lady could have a spot so she wouldn't be upset or worry about it. The lady then passes the spot, whips around in front of our car, throws up her arms, and starts screaming at Aaron through the car. She then goes around and parks somewhere else, gets out and comes back and starts the conversation again. Now, naturally, thinking of this verse, I apologize to the woman. I apologize to this woman for being devoid of happiness. That's a quote. All right? So this does not make us perfect at this. I would argue that it was a lot better than a lot of the other things that I wanted to say, but it doesn't make us perfect at this, right? We got in the store and Aaron looked at me and said, that's where we're going to take this, huh? I was like, gosh. All right, so, therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, which is referring back to being quick to speak and quick to anger, and receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. Let's keep going, 23 through 27. Those who, all right, we're going to have some underlined, bolded text throughout the sermon today. I'm going to ask you to read some of these with me. Read these underlined, capitalized words with me here. Those who hear and don't act are like those who glance in the mirror, walk away, and 2 minutes later have no idea who they are or what they look like. But whoever catches a glimpse of the revealed counsel of God, the free life, even out of the corner of his eye, and sticks with it, is no distracted scatterbrain, but a man or a woman of action. That person will find delight and affirmation in the action. Anyone who sets himself up as religious by talking a good game is self-deceived. This kind of religion is hot air and only hot air. Real religion, the kind that passes muster before God the Father, is this: reach out, reach out to the homeless and loveless and their plight, and guard against corruption from the godless world. If you skip over just a few chapters there, you come to James 4. This is kind of the theme through all of James. We could just read James from beginning to end and make this whole point. But James 4:17 says, so whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for them it is sin. For instance, it is possible that I knew it wasn't the right thing to do to respond to the woman in the parking lot. Possibly. All right, let's go to John. We're going to look at a couple verses in John, and then we'll try to make this make a little bit more sense. John 13:17 says this: if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. John 14:21. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them, he it is who loves me. Whoever has my commands and keeps them. All right, we're going to try to make this, we're going to try to bring this in a little bit more and make this make a little more sense. We're going to do an example here for you. So what we're going to do, pay attention to this for the next 2 minutes or so, and we're going to try to bring this in and have this make a little more sense. Hello? What are you doing?
What?
Your room. I just walked past your room. I told you to clean it 3 days ago.
I know.
I am so glad you know. Now, what do we plan on doing about this?
I memorized what you said.
You memorized that I told you to clean your room.
Every word.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I learned how to say it in Greek and Hebrew.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, and I read a book called 5 Ways How to Clean Your Room, and it really helped me understand what you said. Like, it was really life-changing. It was awesome.
You read an entire book to explain to you what I meant when I said, clean your room.
And I had friends from my small group over, and it was so good. We talked about the importance and what it was like to have a clean room and how you should have a clean room. It was just so good.
So your small group thinks that this is the approach that you should all take.
Oh, and Gabby came over. You know Gabby.
Oh, yes.
Well, we mapped it out on a sheet of paper what it would look like when I did clean my room, and it looked so good. Everything was so precise.
What just happened here?
Just keep holding me accountable.
Does that make a little more sense? Thanks. Tony, she was really good at that, buddy. I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. All right. I don't think we need to, but we'll come back to that here in just a little bit. Now we'll actually get into the sermon part of this. All right. 1 Samuel 14. If you want to turn there with me, we're going to be in 1 Samuel 14 and then 17 here for the rest of this. 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 47 through 48. You don't have to read the underline here. I'm just laying it out because, it's like a bulleted list. I want you to see what we're kind of looking at here. This is chapter 14. When Saul had taken the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side. Against Moab, against the Ammonites, against Edom, against the kings of Zobah, and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he routed them. And he did valiantly and struck down the Amalekites and delivered Israel out of the hands of those who plundered them. Okay? Here's a pretty significant list of people, kings, and kingdoms that Saul has taken on and not only defeated, routed, destroyed, all kinds of synonyms for completely wiped out that you will see in your various translations. That is important when we look at chapter 17. All right, in chapter 17, we have the Philistines and we have the Israelites. All right, we've got them. They're in the valley. Okay, and they're facing off at each other. You've got big Goliath, giant Goliath, 9 foot, 9 inches tall, almost 200 pounds of armor, a spear I couldn't pick up. You know Goliath. Okay, Goliath is there. They're in the valley. The valley is about a mile wide. It's a very narrow ravine, and there's a stream runs right down the middle of it almost. This is what it looks like. So, I don't know if this will work or not. No. Okay, so your top left picture there is the left side of this valley. Top right is the right side of the valley. This is attempted at being a landscape picture. That's actually David Nasser in the picture from one of his sermons that he does. But this is the valley. All right, so kind of where David is standing here, David Nasser, would be where the Philistines were, kind of a little bit higher ground, and the Israelites would have been lined up on the other side, and this is where they are, okay? Now, we're going to look at verses 8 through 11. I've put up those on the screen just for emphasis for what we're talking about here. But let's look at 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 8 through 11. He, being Goliath, he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all of Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Okay, now if you go back in chapter 14, what we just read, it just listed off all of these military conquests that Saul and this same army had had, one of which was against the Philistines. And it says that they weren't even close, right? But now, here we are, and in verse 11, it says, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. skip just a couple verses there, and it says in verse 16, it says, for 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. This is important. This went on for 40 days, twice a day. For 40 days, twice a day. This is what we're looking at, all right? Now, still in chapter 17, we're going to look at verses 20 through 24. Again, what's on the screen is not all of it. That's there for emphasis. I'm going to read from here. But in this part, you have David, okay? David had brothers. His 3 older brothers were out. They were with the army, okay? They were soldiers in the army. David was, the little hipster of the family who was out in the field. He was the little bitty scrawny one. He had the skinny jeans and the pumpkin spice latte, and he's watching sheep. Okay, this is David's job. He's on his own. So David gets a command from his dad to go take lunch to the real soldiers. Go take lunch to his brother, take some stuff to Saul. And he'd been doing this, running back and forth. It's not far. He was nearby. And starting in verse 20. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took the provisions and went, as Jesse, his father, had commanded him. And he came to the encampment as the host, the Israelites, was going out to battle line, shouting the war cry. Okay, so David left early in the morning, and he got there. It said this had been going on for 40 days, twice a day. So he got there in the morning before this had happened. He showed up as the Israelites were marching up to the battle line, dressed out, ready to go, shouting the war cry on about day 41. Starting back over in verse 21, it says, and Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before, and David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. So let's break this down, all right? This is Israel. This is the army of the Lord under Saul the conqueror. This is their daily routine. They wake up. They get all dressed up. Everyone comes out together and lines up. They shout the war cry together, and then they run away. They go back to their tents, and they wait for the next time. Twice a day, every day, and they repeat it. So here's what this looks like. Every day, the army of the Israelites, God's army, every morning and every evening for that matter, they wake up, they get dressed, they come out, they line up, they bang the drums, they shake their swords, they shout the war cry, and then they go back and they get in their tents and they wait for the next time that's time to do it. This is what's happening every day, twice a day, for 40 days. Why in the world is this significant? And why in the world did I pick this out in this great story of David and Goliath? Well, because sometimes this looks eerily similar to my model for church. Wake up, get all dressed up, everyone comes out together and lines up. We all have someone standing up front rallying the troops, and we shout the war cry. We go back to our houses, and we wait for next Sunday, and then we repeat it. The issue that struck me was that this can look a lot like sometimes how I do church, how I look at the gathering, how I look at the Christian walk, how I look at the Christian faith. Sometimes it becomes easy to read, becomes easy to become the guy in the story that we're reading about and looking at him and saying, he is so dumb. The guy who goes up to Jesus and he's like, well, what do I have to do? Well, love your neighbor. Well, let's clarify that. Who exactly is my neighbor, okay? But we become that guy all of a sudden because we read it, love your neighbor. Okay, so what do? All right, well, I start researching all the times that it talks about love your neighbor. And then I start reading, dissertation papers on who is your neighbor. And then I invite my small group to come along and we study loving your neighbor, right? And then when it really gets good, I'll write a blog or like a series of Facebook posts about all that I learned while studying, instead of just loving your neighbor. Instead of just loving your neighbor. If we go back to all those verses that had the underline, what was always underlined? Go, do, keep, be, action. Those who know my commands and keep them. Those who know what to do and do it. When he separates the sheep from the goats and he's talking to the sheep, he didn't say, you went to seminary. You preached before 10,000 people. You did something. And the something is never anything that we would even think anything about. You gave a cup of water. You gave a loaf of bread. You came and visited. But it's action. It's doing. And sometimes it gets easy to get wrapped up in doctrine and studies and semantics and traditions and different varying thoughts and all this, when really it's just Jesus saying, go love your neighbor. Sometimes it really is just that simple. No matter how complicated I attempt to make it, it really is just that simple. It's like we always say from up here, what Jesus said is not complicated, it's just really hard. It's actually very simple, it's just really hard. And so we want to be men and women of action. We want to be known for what we're doing. We want to be known by that huge list on the front of your handout. If you've already looked at that or look at that, we want to be known for that list on that handout of the things that we are doing for our neighbors here in this community. The things that we do week in and week out with the food pantry and the clothing closet. The things that we do throughout the year with trunk or treat meal and the Thanksgiving meal. We want to be known for what we do and how we love our neighbors. Everyone around us, everyone that we can reach, everyone that we can be a part of. Even when it sometimes becomes easy to be Sydney lying on the couch talking about, how well we studied it and how well we learned, and like even practicing that skit and going through it, like it was hard to even practice that skit or go through the lines. Especially when I said, I'm so glad you know, what are you going to do about it? And what did she say? I memorized what you said. That was a kick in the teeth. Well, that's great. Now what are we going to do about it? So, I think that, guys, listen, first of all, this. A couple things. First off, every sermon I preach, as I always say, is a sermon at me that other people get to listen to, right? It's a sermon about a guy in a parking lot who, gets bent out of shape at somebody who's being rude in a parking lot, right? The other part of this is that you can't hear this as an indictment. I heard a great quote from a guy not even 2 months ago who said, people always yell at me for stepping on their toes. I can't actually step on your toes. Move your feet. But here's the thing, guys, we're doing these things, right? Like, there are so many things that we're involved in, and there are so many opportunities that we're involved in. This is encouraging. This should be encouraging to get behind all of these great things we've got going on. I mean, there's a dozen things in that list that are happening in the next 7 weeks that we can get behind to love our neighbors and to love the people in these 4 walls and outside of these 4 walls. And we have dozens and dozens of people in this congregation this morning who have set these things up and put these things in motion and invited us to come alongside and be a part of blessing our neighbors. As we wrap this up, as we close this out, as each week, we have this opportunity, right? Like, we have this opportunity where we're going to have we've got Ray and Fanny who are sitting down here. We've got Johnny sitting right there. We've got Kevin and Teresa over here. Aaron's over here. Curtis and Nancy are right here in the middle. Jackie and Tony are sitting over here. Mark is up here in the front. Like, there's people all around this room. If you want someone just to pray with you, pray for you, pray for something going on, grab somebody by the arm. If you grab a random stranger anywhere in these seats, I guarantee they'll be happy to listen and say a prayer with you. But we want to give you just an opportunity to have the chance where if you want to go talk to one of these people, have them say a prayer with you, have them say a prayer for you, listen to you. This is an opportunity you can do that. If you have questions about any of these ministries that are going on, it's a chance you can do that. If you have questions about Jesus and how all of what we just talked about comes out of an overflowing of your relationship with Jesus, these people would love nothing more than to talk to you about that. So you're welcome. Come down the aisles as Mark sings. There will be people standing in the back. You can go talk to them. Grab someone sitting next to you, but give someone the opportunity to encourage you this morning as we're gathered here as family.